Behind me stands the house where one of the most complicated personalities in the Scottsboro Boys story spent several nights during the progress of the case here in Decatur. Ruby Bates. Ruby Bates' life and legacy is a profoundly complicated story. Ruby Bates serves and functions as one of the primary accusers of the Scottsboro Boys trial during the first case and becomes a witness for the defense, recanting her testimony in the second case. The story of Ruby Bates is a story that exists at the intersection of privilege and irresponsibility, because Ruby Bates decided, along with her co-conspirator Victoria Price, that it was easier to accuse the innocent of a heinous crime than to bear the responsibilities for their own decision making. And yet, Ruby Bates, who made such a heinous decision to accuse the innocent, to cover up her own level of culpability, had a crisis of conscience that caused her to recant her false testimony. To reckon with the story of Ruby Bates carefully and closely is to consider how easily we decide to make other people in our lives disposable. To reckon with the story of Ruby Bates closely is to reckon with the reality of the damage that our privilege can do to other people when we don't consider them equal to us, when we don't consider their stories equal to our stories, when we don't consider the danger that they are in as a result of the privilege that we wield. And yet, to reckon with the story of Ruby Bates is to reckon with the story of someone who, for some strange mix of reasons, a crisis of conscience, a conversation with one of the most famous American preachers, Harry Emerson Fosdick, famous and not uncontroversial, perhaps, a conversation with him, perhaps a spiritual awakening, perhaps some combination of factors leads her to come to the conclusion and leads her to make the decision that she can be more and should be more than a person who wielded their privilege as a weapon against other people. And Ruby Bates decides to recant her initial testimony. In recanting her initial testimony, Ruby Bates ultimately decides to abandon and to jettison all of the privilege that she would enjoy in society. In recanting her initial testimony, Ruby Bates ultimately decides that in the effort to pursue justice, she is willing to forsake her privilege and make herself a social pariah. During the portion of the Scottsboro Boys trial, which took place in Decatur, Ruby Bates is housed in this house, in this community, with the people who look like the people who are fighting for their life as a result of the lie that she told. As she's living in this community, day by day, she is seeing the kinds of people who have been systemically and systematically excluded from the justice system and whose lives are at risk from and by people who live in a system and who benefit from a system that allows them to leverage their privilege as a weapon against others. Ruby Bates does something that is sorely needed in our culture. She steps across the line. She reckons with her guilt. She reckons with her responsibility. She reckons with the way in which she is culpable in the system and in the society that is destroying life around her. And not just life around her, but from the perspective of a pastor, life that is made in the image of God. She is willing to acknowledge that she was wrong. She is willing to acknowledge that she's made a mistake. She is willing to accept culpability. And during the trial, Ruby Bates is housed here, where day by day she looks in the face of the people who hang over the gaping maw and dangerous justice system of America by a thin and ever thinning thread. Ruby Bates represents a complicated personality who is wrong and who makes a decision that puts the lives of people, and not only people, but communities, and not only communities, but families in danger. And yet, Ruby Bates decides that she can be bigger than the mistake that she had made. Ruby Bates is in this home during the portion of the Scottsboro Boys trial, which happens in the community. And Ruby Bates' relationship with the trial and the community constitutes our first stop at our first home on this tour. We have any questions? All right.
Was it a private home or what?
It was a boarding house. Very good question. So during that time in Alabama, there were a number of boarding houses here in Decatur. There's a Winnie Parker boarding house, which is not very far from here, which is included in the Green Book. The Green Book, or the Negro Motorist Guide, is a 20th century document that circulated in African American communities that lets Black people know where they can travel safely, where they can board safely, where they can eat safely during 1930s America. And the Winnie Parker boarding house is right around the corner from here. But during the time that Ruby Bates is living here during the trial, it is a boarding house. It was a boarding house at that time. It is now essentially ground zero for the Scottsboro Boys Museum here in Decatur. And so we're very grateful for the legacy of this home, the way in which it challenges us to come to an understanding of our level of culpability and responsibility and how we can be greater than our mistakes. Any more questions?